Hello, my name is Matt McManaway, and this is my historical figure speech. First, here are my sources. First, I have The Apostle, A Life of Paul by John Pollock, the Westminster Dictionary of the Bible, and the Holy Bible. My visual aids are my sunglasses, a flashlight, and the Holy Bible. Have you ever been ashamed of your past? Have you ever wondered if God could really forgive you for your sinful things you've done? Have you ever felt like your past just keeps you from growing from a faith standpoint? Have you ever let your past become a stumbling block to you serving God? If you're like me, the answer is yes. That is, until I learned about a man we know today as the Apostle Paul. Allow me to introduce you to him. Before his name was changed to Paul, Saul was born in a city named Tarsus. Historians are not sure exactly when he was born, but most speculate it is between 5 BC and 5 AD. While we don't know much about his early years, many believe that Saul came from a wealthy family of tent makers. Saul was sent to Jerusalem to study at a young age, where he learned and embraced the teachings of the Pharisees. Saul later described himself in Philippians 3:5 as, of the people of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews, in regard to the law, a Pharisee. As a Pharisee, Saul passionately rejected the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth. In many cases, Jesus challenged the attitudes and actions of the Pharisees and taught things they opposed. Eventually, it would be a group of religious leaders led by the same Pharisees that would falsely accuse Jesus and have him put to death. Jesus' followers believed he was the Messiah, the Son of God, and that he was raised from the dead. They continued to worship him and follow his teachings and established groups of believers called churches. Because the Pharisees rejected Jesus' teachings, they persecuted his followers as well. Saul led the charge. One of the first martyrs in the New Testament was a man named Stephen, who was stoned to death by the Pharisees. Acts chapter 7 tells us the men who stoned Stephen laid their clothes at Saul's feet while they took his life. And Acts chapter 8, verse 1 says, "And Saul was there, giving approval to his death." Despite his hatred of Jesus and his followers, and his violent persecution of the church, God had other plans for Saul. As Saul was traveling toward Damascus to arrest Christians, a light from heaven engulfed him, and he heard a voice say, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" Saul fearfully asked, "Who are you, Lord?" To which the voice responded, "I am Jesus whom you are persecuting." Saul was blinded by the light from heaven and was led into Damascus by the men he was traveling with. There, God called a man named Ananias to minister and care for Saul. Ananias placed his hands on Saul, and his sight returned, and he was filled with the Holy Spirit. Saul was baptized and spent several days with Jesus' disciples in Damascus. This event was certainly the turning point in Saul's life. Sometime later, Saul became known as Paul, but his name is not the only thing that changed. His life had definitely changed. Immediately, Paul began preaching the gospel of Christ to Hebrews in local synagogues, gaining the trust of church leaders as he teaches and preaches. Paul is later sent on a missionary journey around 44 AD with a man named Barnabas by the church at Antioch. Paul would go on 2 more missionary journeys between the years of 51 AD and 58 AD, creating many new converts and establishing several churches. Paul's journeys were full of hardship, danger, poverty, persecution, and are a testament to his faithfulness. During his 3rd missionary journey, Paul travels to Jerusalem, where some Asian Jews have him arrested. Paul stands trial before local officials Felix and Festus, and eventually appeals to Caesar because he is a Roman citizen. Paul is taken to Rome, where Nero is beginning a time of terrible persecution of the Christians. In his book, The Apostle, A Life of Paul, John Pollock claims Paul is martyred on June 29, 67 AD, although some disagree on the date. Today, Paul is remembered as one of the greatest missionaries who had ever lived. He preached the message of Jesus Christ, he made disciples and started churches throughout the area of the Mediterranean Sea. He mentored young preachers and ordained elders in churches to keep things in order, but perhaps his greatest accomplishment was the writings he left behind. Through the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, Paul is credited by the Westminster Dictionary of the Bible with writing 14 out of the 27 books in the New Testament. These writings contain instructions, doctrine, encouragement, prophecy, and warnings that are just as relevant today as the day they were written. Certainly, the impact of Paul's ministry continues on even today. In conclusion, allow me to return to the questions I began with as we summarize Paul's life. Have you ever been ashamed of your past and wondered if God could really forgive you for the sinful things you've done? Paul's past was one of violence and persecution, but he trusted the forgiveness that Christ offers to overcome it and taught others about grace. Have you ever let your past hinder your faith and spiritual growth? Despite his past that included fierce opposition to Jesus' messages and teachings, Paul had grown faith and knowledge to be one of Christ's greatest ambassadors. Have you ever let your past become a stumbling block to serving God? At one point, Paul was an enemy of Christ, a persecutor of the church, and a murderer of Jesus' followers. This same Paul was used by God to take the gospel to people everywhere, establish churches, and write much of what we call the New Testament today. May Paul's example of transformation, service, and faithfulness be an example and encouragement to you and to I today. Thank you, and God bless.